White, I'm sure you have an opinion on the topic, and I don't know virtually anyone in this room. And yet I am confident to say the following. If you are white and you have not devoted years of sustained study, struggle, and focus on this topic, your opinions are necessarily limited, superficial, and uninformed. Wow, how can I say that when I don't even know you? I mean, maybe you've been to Costa Rica. Maybe you have multiracial nieces and nephews. Maybe you were in Teach for America. I can say it because nothing in dominant culture gives us the information we would need to have an informed opinion on arguably the most complex, nuanced social dilemma for the last several hundred years. For example, you can get through graduate school in this country without ever discussing racism, can you not? You can get through teacher education in this country without ever discussing racism. And if you're in a progressive teacher education program, you'll have one required course, multicultural of some sort. But that doesn't mean you'll be discussing racism. You might just be talking about how to introduce ethnic authors in February. Okay? You can get through law school. You can be seen as qualified to lead anything, virtually. Right? So the first challenge for those of us who are white is humility.
When they say remaining silent in a situation of injustice, it's a complacent injustice itself, it's true. Remember, in the past, we didn't explore much about racism, and we had people who came out, I mean the early scholars, people who came up with what is called the critical race theory. Critical race theory, we have the early scholars, people like Crenshaw, we have people like Kimberly, we have people like Richard DeGaldo, we have people like Bell. These are the earliest scholars who saw to it that no, racism is not just right when we look at it as a person, black or white. There is so much. There's something called intersectionality. Looking racism beyond just color, that is looking racism in religion, looking racism in law, looking racism in different types of aspects. And that is what is called the critical race theory. This is a social movement. I can say also it is a social movement, because why am I saying it's a social movement? Social movement because we have a group of people who always oppose the critical race theory. And even the professors who came up with this critical race theory, they saw to it that a black person was not being represented in the right way that he was supposed to be represented. So as in even today we are seeing this professor, and she's going to say a lot of things that probably white people will feel like they are being confronted for saying this, and that is what we call the white fragility. The white fragility is in the sense that when we try to talk about these intersectionalities, talk about law, talk about job sectors, talk about the hospital, how are black people treated in these places. So when you look at these intersectionalities, we are going to find that when we talk about this situation, people from the white community will think that they are always being confronted. And it is true. This is going to be proven through the speech of this white scholar. So let's watch this video and then come back, have a talk about it, because I feel like this is a topic that is so interesting that we need to talk about. Until then, let's watch the video and then come back, say something. You know how we usually do, right? If you're watching this video for the first time, consider subscribing to the channel, join my membership, and get to know what I can offer you.
Here, I am reinforcing the centrality of whiteness. I want to name that. And trust me, I've gone home many a night and tossed and turned over that. Where I always land is that it is a both and, right? To not use this position in this way, for me, is to really be white. And I'd like to be a little less white, right? And a little less white, by the way, does not mean a little more Italian American, okay? It means a little less oppressive, quite frankly, a little less oblivious and arrogant and ignorant and certain, and a little more humble and curious and vulnerable, right? The last thing that I want to acknowledge is that nothing in society gives any of us good information about how this works, and so hopefully again, as an insider, I can offer something to people of color. I do think people of color know about white fragility way more than I ever will. But again, I do have an insider's perspective. So let me say a little bit about some of the challenges of trying to educate white people on racism. And a great example is I was recently going to give a similar talk to a large tech company, and before they would sign the contract, the legal department wanted to see my slides. And when they got to this slide, they actually asked me if I could take the word white off the slide. To which I replied, "You really should have vetted me before you called." No, I won't. All right. First of all, I've never met a white person who doesn't have an opinion on racism. Have you? If you are not sure all white people have an opinion on racism, just bring it up the next time you're around a bunch of white people. Maybe tonight when you have a drink in Noe Valley. Okay. I don't think you can grow up in this society or spend any significant time here or any other Western-oriented white settler colonial context and not develop an opinion on racism. That doesn't make it informed. So I'm going to say perhaps my first controversial thing. If you are white, I'm sure you have an opinion on the topic, and I don't know virtually anyone in this room. And yet I am confident to say the following. If you are white and you have not devoted years of sustained study, struggle, and focus on this topic, your opinions are necessarily limited, superficial, and uninformed. Wow, how can I say that when I don't even know you? I mean, maybe you've been to Costa Rica. Maybe you have multiracial nieces and nephews. Maybe you were in Teach for America. I can say it because nothing in dominant culture gives us the information we would need to have an informed opinion on arguably the most complex, nuanced social dilemma for the last several hundred years. For example, you can get through graduate school in this country without ever discussing racism, can you not? You can get through teacher education in this country without ever discussing racism. And if you're in a progressive teacher education program, you'll have one required course, multicultural of some sort. But that doesn't mean you'll be discussing racism. You might just be talking about how to introduce ethnic authors in February. Okay? You can get through law school. You can be seen as qualified to lead anything, virtually. Right? So the first challenge for those of us who are white is humility. I want you to know that I'm not standing in front of the choir right now. Even if you volunteered to come, there is no white choir. I am not the choir. And the moment I think I'm the choir, I'm going to be complacent and arrogant and probably defensive about any suggestion that I might not be as much of the choir as I think that I am. Second challenge is that if I do a good job, this won't be comfortable, particularly for the white people in the room, for the whole time. The status quo is racism, and as a white person, that's comfortable for me virtually 24/7. So I'm not here to uphold that. I want to unsettle that, because we will not get where we need to go from a place of white comfort. The key is what we do with those moments of discomfort if I manage to stimulate them. We can certainly use them as a way out. We can also ideally use them as a relatively rare way in. Why does this unsettle me? What would it mean if it were true? And there are two places where white people begin to get uncomfortable when I give a talk, whether you can consciously articulate it to yourself or not. The first place is how often I'm going to say the word white. So prepare yourself, about 100 times. And we're not used to being seen racially. Right? We're not used to having people proceed as if our race has meaning. And the second place where we can begin to get uncomfortable is that I am going to challenge the very precious ideology of individualism. And I'm going to do it by generalizing about white people all night long. And you're going to be just fine. Okay? It is a very precious ideology. In general, I'm talking about the white collective, we don't like to be generalized about. And so, just so you know, if I thought it was racist to generalize about white people, I wouldn't do it, so you don't have to send that email. You can actually ask yourself, well, might I be missing something if I don't understand it? Right? Rather than she must be doing that wrong. Okay? Yes, we are individuals. Of course. And I couldn't possibly hold every person's story in this room even if I wanted to. We are also members of a social group. By virtue of our membership in this social group, we could literally predict whether you and your mother were going to survive your birth. regardless of your age. We can predict how long you're going to live because you're a member of this social group. There's a collective experience to being white. There are shared messages. We are all swimming in the same water, right? And just like gender, the way you respond to gender socialization, your challenges to gender socialization, you may have them. There's variations, but nobody can avoid dealing with gender socialization and responding to it. It is the same with racial socialization, right? So every moment that you want to exempt yourself, try this. All right, she's saying most white people X. I was a Y. Okay, good for you. Okay, you were Y. Most are X. How did Y set you up into the racial hierarchy you live in, swim in, grew up in, breathe in, right? It set you up differently than X set me up, but we both got set up. It's on you to use everything you see as unique about yourself and figure out how it set you up rather than exempted you. And finally, we don't tend to understand the systemic nature of racism. So let's just start there, and I'm going to do this the way that I always do this to explain the difference between personal prejudice that everybody has and systemic racism. So prejudice, prejudgment, everyone has it. There is no human objectivity. We get it from everywhere across our lifespans. Most of it is not conscious. I would highly suggest, and I think it's being sold out there, Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt's new book, Biased, where she pulls together all the research, and the research is clear. All of us have prejudice. I'll use the term bias, and most of it is implicit or unconscious. Okay? And therefore, all of us act on it. The way you see the world drives the way you respond to the world. Right? So everybody has it, everybody does it. But when you back one group's collective racial bias with legal authority and institutional control, it is transformed into a far-reaching system that becomes the default. It becomes automatic. It's not dependent on your friendliness or your good intentions, right? So it gets embedded in all the institutions and also in cultural definitions of what's even normal, right? What is professionalism? What is intelligence? Whose stories are told? By whom? Whose stories are not told, right? And I'm going to use an example from one form of oppression to launch us into the form we're here to talk about tonight. So we're here to talk about racism. I'm very clear you can't really separate these out. But for our purposes, we're going to take a focused look on racism. But I'm going to draw from an example from the form called sexism. And relax, I'm going to use dominant language because I'm going to use this the way our textbooks teach us, right? So hang in there. Women got the right to vote in this country in 1920. There was only one possible way that women could get the right to vote, and that was for men to give it to us. Women couldn't vote on the right to vote. They couldn't even speak in many public forums to advocate for their right to vote. Could a woman be prejudiced against a man and mean to him in a one-on-one interaction? Of course. Could women as a group literally deny every single man in the society his civil rights? No. Could men deny every woman in the society her civil rights? Yes. And that is a significant difference that must be acknowledged in language, right? Right. So think about today. In 2019, I'm going to offer you a question. Today, if men as a group wanted to take away our right to vote, could they? Now that's a little easier to see today than it was about 10 years ago when I first started asking this question. But I have been asking this question for many years because this is the best example of the difference between individual prejudice and institutional power, when yours is backed. And most people, when I offer that question, there's confusion, they're not so clear. Some people are sure that they could, some are not, which is also part of how oppression works. So let me just show you some basic statistics from 2019. The Fortune 500 CEOs are 98% male. The 10 richest Americans are all men. 7 of them are the richest people in the world. I think economic power is probably the ultimate form. The presidency and the vice presidency has always been 100% male. The Senate, keep in mind we're celebrating the most diverse Senate Congress we've ever had. 75% male, House of Representatives 70% male, the current cabinet 84% male, U.S. mayors 80% male, U.S. governors 84% male, federal judges 87% male, police officers 85% male. So I'll just ask you again, if they wanted to. I'm not saying they would. My point is, by definition, institutional power is deeply embedded in the fabric of society. It's embedded across history. These are not flexible systems. Heads up, we live in patriarchy. We live in an androcentric, male-dominated, patriarchal society. We always have, and it didn't end in 1920. And I'm very confident that if Hillary Clinton had become president, patriarchy wasn't going to end that day. Anymore, I mean, if the word patriarchy came out of her mouth, any more than we can see that racism did not end upon Obama's presidency. I would argue it got an infusion. All systems of oppression can allow for exceptions. The rule will be consistent, right? 2019. And just in case you need a visual on my claim that we live in patriarchy, this is the House Freedom Caucus. This is arguably the most powerful committee in the nation. Talk about making decisions at the table that will affect the lives of people who are not at that table. They're literally discussing the health care bill when this picture was taken. Right? In case you need an image from popular culture, this is cover of Vanity Fair. This is a slide I made. I don't even know who it is. I just Googled white guy. And I got this, and I thought, oh, that's a good one. If you have young people in your life, and if you have kind of self-awareness yourself, you know that children are deeply shaped by films, by media, by imagery and marketing, right? The way that they think about the world and understand the world. And all of us pretty much have been deeply shaped by film. Those who write and direct film are our cultural narrators, and they shape how we see ourselves and how we see ourselves in relation to other people. And of the 100 top grossing films of all time across the world disseminated from the US, 99 were directed by men. And 95 of them white. Institutional power is the ability to disseminate your worldview to everyone and to shape how they see themselves, how they see you, how they see themselves in relationship to you. To tell the story of the other when you are not in relationship with the other, when you don't know the other. To be able to represent the other and to do it and position yourself as simply telling universal human stories, not from any particular position. So that Mike Lee is a film director who makes films about the human condition, and Spike Lee is a black film director who makes films about black issues. So Facebook puts these things out on holidays. This one came out to commemorate the anniversary of women gaining suffrage. And then some folks did this. Which women got access to the vote in 1920? Yeah, white women. So another dimension of institutional power is that your group's experience is held up as universal. So while we were oppressed as women, we were certainly privileged as white. There is no more universal woman's experience than there is a universal human experience on the physical plane where we live in the here and now. Right? And that recognition, I'm sure many of you know, was termed by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw intersectionality. Right? All right, so legal authority and institutional control is what transforms people's prejudice into a far-reaching system. So let's look at race in 2019, right? So the presidency and vice presidency, 100% white. The US Senate, 91% white. I just have to point out again, the most diverse Congress we've ever had. The House of Representatives, 73% white. The current cabinet, 89% white. The governors, 98% white. Mayors, 88% white. Military advisors, just think about who we go to war with. 100% white. Federal judges, 88% white. Police officers, 80% white. The people who decide which TV shows we see, 93% white. The people who decide which books we read, 90% white. People who decide which news is covered, 85% white. People who decide which music is produced, 95% white. School teachers, 82% white. Full-time college professors, 84% white. Owners of men's pro football teams, 97% white. Owners of men's pro basketball teams, 98% white. The players, 75% black. Right? And yet, what is the definition of a racist, of what it means to be racist in the mainstream? Right? Well, it's an individual, always an individual, not a system, who consciously does not like people based on race. Apparently, if it's not conscious, it doesn't count. And is intentionally mean to them. It also has to be intentional to count. Individual, conscious, malintent across race. That is a racist. And I don't know that you could come up with a better definition to protect the system of racism than this one. Because this definition makes it virtually impossible to talk to the average white person about the inevitable absorption of a racist worldview that we get from living in a culture in which it is infused and embedded across all its institutions, right? I think that this definition is the root of virtually all white defensiveness on this topic. Have you guys noticed any white defensiveness on this topic? Because if that's my definition of a racist, and you've just suggested I've said or done something racist, much less that I benefit from racist just by being white, what I'm going to hear is you just questioned my very moral character. And now I need to defend my moral character, right? And I will, right? So racism is a system, not an event. It certainly occurs in specific moments that we can identify, but of course it's 365, 24/7. It's the system we're in. And part of being raised as a white person in this society has been to be raised to be what I think of as functionally illiterate on this topic. I had opinions, I spouted them freely, I cringe today when I think about that. And part of gaining literacy, and of course that is a lifelong process I will not be finished with, part of gaining literacy has been to understand the kind of collective dimensions of racism, but also how different groups of color get set up differently. So what's in my head about indigenous peoples is different than what's in my head about Asian heritage people, and that's different than what's in there about African heritage people. I have different levels of comfort and anxiety and interest, etc. And therefore those groups have different experiences. Okay? And it's very important that we break that down and that we learn those histories and those struggles and those stereotypes and those experiences. So I want to be really clear. All peoples who are not perceived or defined as white experience racism. And they experience it in shared ways, and they experience it in ways that are different depending on their group and its position to whiteness. Having said that, after 20 years of doing this work, I feel very clear about the following. There is something profoundly anti-black in this culture. And in the white mind, black people are the ultimate racial other. We have the most energy about black people. We have the most resentment and anxiety about black people. And when I have a very short period of time with white people, and I want you to get in touch with your early messages, I ask you to think about black people, right? And anti-blackness, there are poles, right? White is here and black is here. And I don't have time to get into it, but there is no white without black. There's a deep need for white, the white collective. There is no superiority without inferiority, right? So there are poles. And anti-blackness cuts across all groups, including black people. The darker you are, the more compounded the oppression. And while I'm here to challenge white people in our complacency, there's a very sensitive couple questions I think peoples of color have to ask themselves. One, what does anti-blackness look like in our group, and who have I aligned with? Right? So having mentioned history, anti-blackness, it's a system, I want to just give you one glance at the trajectory of anti-blackness since the beginning of this country to the current time to illustrate those points. And this slide will be deliberately dense, and we can think about it as state-sanctioned organized crime, quite frankly, against African Americans. And it begins with kidnapping and 300 plus years of enslavement, torture, rape, and brutality, and it carries on. About 1/4 of the way in here, bans on testifying against whites, and you are in my lifetime. 1/4 of the way in that slide, you are in my lifetime where it was technically legal to murder black people in this country. I would love to never again hear another white person say, I didn't own slaves. As if that ended on that day. And about halfway in at employment discrimination, you are now in 2019 with copious empirical evidence. And if you don't know some of these things, that's on you to educate yourself. But I'm going to pick it up in 2019, and let me repeat, copious empirical evidence. Employment discrimination, educational discrimination, bias laws and policing, white flight, subprime mortgages, mass incarceration, school-to-prison pipeline, disproportionate special education referrals and punishments, testing, tracking, school funding, biased media, voter suppression, cultural mockery, historical omissions, unaddressed trauma, to name a few. It's a system. It's the system we're in, and none of us could be and none of us were exempt from its forces. And this system is not interrupted by friendliness. The system is not interrupted because I smile at black people when I pass them by or go to lunch on occasion. And African Americans are not and have never been in the position to do this to the entire white collective, and the white collective has always been and continues to be in the position to do this to African Americans. There is no such thing as reverse racism. Okay? It's a system. All right, now, I know I'm going to need to update this picture pretty soon here, but I can't let go of it yet because when I saw it, I mean, you can just take a wild guess how I feel about Paul Ryan, but that's not why I picked it. When I saw this picture, I just thought, this is what it means to be white. These are his incoming interns. These are our future politicians. These are the people who will sit at the tables making decisions about the lives of those who are not at the table and who they have not been taught are valuable to know or consider or understand. I want you to imagine the neighborhoods they likely grew up in, right? The schools they likely went to, the teachers they likely had, the friendship circles, their wedding albums. And now imagine that these are our future medical researchers. These are our future school teachers. These are our future social workers, right? Our future lawyers, etc. Right? And this is the position from which white people claim we're objective on race. Yeah. Just get that image back in your mind of that history slide, and then just look at this. This is last year's college champion Jeopardy playoffs. So those are our best and our brightest, soon to be certified as highly educated from our institutions of higher learning. And that's the board at the end of the grand champion round. So as we can see, there was one category not one of them touched. Clearly the most difficult. Nobody was going to risk losing the grand championship. You know, it's just one picture. I think it speaks volumes. And I don't feel that I can do justice to what it means that we don't know our history. That we could ever separate it out and see it as their history, not the history of this country. Because when we don't know our history and we cannot trace it into the present, we are left with deeply problematic explanations for current conditions. Victim-blaming explanations. So I want to walk you through some questions. I'm going to ask you, you can close your eyes, you can look down at the ground. I just want to, in your mind, I want you to notice what images and what narratives come up for you. Right? And I would like you to answer these questions from your childhood self, your younger self, not your sophisticated adult self. maybe 10, 11, 12. What do you see? Kind of how would you explain it? So how racially diverse was your neighborhood growing up? If your neighborhood was not racially diverse, why wasn't it? Where did people of different races than you live? If they didn't live in your neighborhood, where did they live? And what was it like where people of different races than yourself lived? And how did you know? What images come to your mind when you think about the spaces where they were? And why didn't you live in the same neighborhood? Why don't we live in the same neighborhood? Were you encouraged to visit the neighborhoods where people that were of a different race than you lived and get to know the people there, build relationships with them? Or were you discouraged from doing that? And if so, how? How was that conveyed to you? What were the characteristics of a good school? What makes a school good? What are the characteristics of a bad school? What makes a school bad? What's it like at a bad school? What images do you get? Did your parents care about what kind of school you went to? Did they have any energy about that? And if so, why? Were the honors or advanced placement classes and the lower track classes equally racially integrated? And if not, why not? How often have you had a teacher or professor of your own race, or races if you're multiracial? How often have you been to a wedding that was either all or virtually all white? If we opened your wedding album, if you're married, what would we notice? How often have you been to a funeral that was virtually all white or all white? And what are some of the ways in which your race has shaped your life? So I asked these questions to get to the earlier messaging. I have a pretty good idea of the patterns of that rose up as you thought about them. And yet when you put all this together, right, our socialization into deep racist bias, our definition of a racist as a mean, bad person, you get some rather superficial white narratives. So I want to be really clear about something. As a result of being raised in this society, I have a racist worldview. I have racist biases. I have racist patterns that have developed.
A point of discussion that I believe it's important. When a person says reverse racism, there is no such thing as a reverse racism, because racism itself, it is a system. And when racism is a system, the system itself was built by the people who are already in power. And the sister has shared a given number of statistics. You can see almost every sector that we are having, every sector that people are being kept, we are having the palm color people. The palm color people have been put in these sectors and they have occupied these sectors. And this shows you how this is the structure. Number two, Look at the earliest churches. We have seen people coming out saying that black folks were never allowed to enter into these churches. Now that's something which happened in the past, you know. That's what I'm saying. The intersectionality that we're looking through racism is through a lot of things. We're not just looking at racism in a confined way, that you're black, that you're white. How is this affecting people? You know, that's what that's to say. So this answers the question, all races are something that she said about reverse racism. And I'll support her by saying, indeed, there is no such thing as reverse racism, because racism itself is a system. It's something which was put there, and there is no way I've seen a black person trying to reverse this system. They haven't reversed the system, right? You agree with me? Because so that will tell you that there is nothing like reverse racism, because critical race theory itself debunks the fact that there is nothing like reverse racism. And for the longest time, I usually say that, for example, if you're a white person, I know sometimes these things don't happen to you, but you are committing injustice. Why are you committing injustice? Because you're silent. You're committing injustice because you're not speaking out for your brothers and sisters. You are not speaking out for the things which are happening. And now when those people are up there making some decisions, these things are also going to affect you, whether you are white or black. Even if you're going to the supermarket to buy something, the price of something, there is no price for black people, there is no price for white people. So in as much as we are seeing these economic problems coming out, the economic problems does not only affect people from the black community. These economic problems also faces people from the white community. Now, what is the right way to curb these problems? The right way to curb these problems is by understanding the problems that each race is going through. If it is power dynamics, how many black people are we having in power? How many black people have put in, you know, in the military sector? How many black people have been kept in the health sector? You know, and so on and so on and so on. Because I feel like this is a discussion that we need to discuss. Ironically, it's an African who discusses about this. Yep, I know it's ironically because the only way I can pay you is by just talking about this. I know something bad happened in the past, and the only way I can do by repaying this is letting people know the truth, letting people to get to know the truth. And doesn't matter where the information comes from, whether the information is right. That's what really matters. Doesn't matter when it comes from an African, an Asian. If it's something that supports people from the black community, and it's true and it stands by what is right regardless of where they come from, then I think that that's something which should be appreciated. Because for the longest time, I've been having people in the comment section trying to ask, why is this African man mingling in our business? I know I'm mingling in your business, right? But what am I saying? Is it wrong or right? What does it take for it to be wrong or right, you know? So that's a question that you need to ask yourself. And I appreciate the lady for coming out really and talking about this, because for the longest time, this is a topic that it is really, really due. And he talked about it, you know, in a way that we need to understand more about it today. And also even the African immigrants who are living here, going to the United States, that's one thing they need to understand. This is an education that they need to get before going out there, because it's important. It will affect how they do the activities, it will affect how they get the jobs out there. And for me, this is something which is just right with me. So I'm here talking about what other people also said about this. So somebody said, I'm a sociologist, a social scientist, so I am qualified to stereotype you according to your group. We have millions examples of white fragility. You disagree. You fail to admit your racism. That only proves that you are racist. Now we have millions and one example. So I think the sister is she's receiving criticism from other people. And let's get to hear also the criticism that people also said about this. Imagine showing the lady photos from a loved one's funeral and you're trying to keep your compassion and not burst into tears. She just goes, yep, exactly as I thought, mostly white people. Okay. There's something I need to get right. Something that I need to get right is this. Sometimes racism never ended. Racism is happening until today. This is a discussion that is way even much than me, but all I can do is just try. So listen, this person is saying that their forefathers, if that's what I understand, their forefathers are the ones who did these things, right? So if their forefathers are the ones who did these things, but we have this system, racism is not an event, racism is a system. And the lady has just said, this is written by J. Haulani Kawanui. I don't think this sounds like a Japanese person. It is not an event. If it's an event, really, we could have said that this is something that happened in the past, our forefathers did this, and it's an end. It is a system which still lives by the people of the United States. That's why we say it is called systemic racism, because it's something which is still happening till date. So you get to understand the problem. So if a person pulls out pictures in the past, what people were people were doing to the black folks, you'll try to understand that we have two periods of these things when these things happen. In the past, it's different from now, but even still, black people, their problems haven't ended. Their problems are still there. Now, when the problems are still there, how are we going to address this? We are going to address this through the critical race theory, and this is majorly what the sister was trying to explain. For me, that is my understanding of what I think was going on in this discussion. So feel free to tell me what you think. Do you agree with the sister? Because I can see from the comment section, some people might not really agree with what she's saying. But for me, I agree with what she's saying, because she has provided proofs. She has provided how things are being run out there. She has shown, and people can really see this. I hope that you get to learn from this video. I also learned while I was watching the video, and I like the way the lady was compassionate, how she presented what she was saying, and it was clearly, and she also made the audience try to understand. You could see the audience was so quiet. The audience was so, was so surprised that, okay, we're now talking about this, because this is something that we need to talk about. Because palm color people, they feel like, no, that's not my problem, that's a black problem. That's a black problem. Tomorrow you want to marry a black person, it will become your problem. So just look at it look at the bigger picture, right? That's what they say. Look at the bigger picture. The bigger picture is, it's not only just about you. It's about moving forward as a community, moving forward as people, moving forward, getting to understand the differences, getting to understand the problems that people go through today, getting to understand how to navigate challenges. The challenges that are happening in the past are still happening today, maybe even far much worse than ever before. So I hope that this video finds you well wherever you are today. This is Eugene Talk Stories. If you're watching this video for the first time again, you can consider subscribing to my channel, join my membership, and get to see what I can offer you. Until then, guys, peace, love, and harmony. Salute. And let's meet on my next video. I hope to see you there, and I'm glad that you're okay wherever you are, and let's meet on my next video, right?